Hi, I'm Jon Atack, and yet again, I am delighted to welcome my very good friend, Karen De La Carriere. Hi, Karen.
Jon! Hello, Jon. Lovely to see you. Lovely to be with you for another hour.
Yes.
Hugs to you. I am really happy to talk to you at this really troubled time on Earth.
It is, isn't it? What on earth is Putin doing? He's not sane. There's something terribly wrong with him.
That's exactly
actually, what we're seeing is not the Russians doing this to the Ukrainians. Yes. This is the Russian government under its dictator Vladimir Putin doing this.
Yeah. I know that Putin ordered his, what do they call it now, KSB or whatever they
FSB,
are. The FSB to raid
Services Bureau.
Oh yeah. Apparently Scientology has been able to extort multi-millions of dollars out of Russia.
Yeah.
Can't do it anymore. SWIFT. Russian banking system frozen.
Mm.
And apparently ruble has been devalued to something like 1 ruble now is 5 cents.
Mm.
So there goes his fortune.
Mm.
There goes Putin's multi-million-dollar fortune. Imagine if you had, and all the oligarchs that had all these so-called multi-million dollars. Well, if 1 ruble is 5 cents, that's quite a... But Scientology got a real toehold into Russia through Captain Bill.
But it started really in the, I think in the early 90s when Moscow University was funded by Scientology, and you had this bizarre situation where if you went into the foyer of this university, you would see a bronzed bust of L. Ron Hubbard, and they sacked Alexander Dworkin, who was a professor there, because he complained about this, and that's pretty much what set him going in what is now nearly 30 years of work helping people who've been harmed by authoritarian cults. But they, you know, they really poured money in, and then the government started to push back, and we are seeing that pushback now quite severely, with, you know, as you said, with raids happening very frequently on Scientology properties. But at the same time, the Ronsorg has crept in, and I mean, we both knew Captain Bill. And he was, I remember the first time I asked somebody about Captain Bill, and it was Ron Hopkins, who'd been the commanding officer UK, lovely guy, Hoppy.
Oh, lovely guy.
And I said to him, what do you think of Captain Bill? And he said, he's bananas. I think that pretty much sums it up, you know.
What is puzzling is that he displayed his kookiness. He was beyond eccentric.
Oh yeah.
He was Looney Tunes. You know, you can have someone with a few oddities, a few eccentricities. Captain Bill was way beyond that.
Oh yeah.
But the cult that loudly wag and brag, they have all the technology to handle the mind, to handle mental weirdnesses, compulsions, repressions, did nothing, absolutely nothing to handle Looney Tunes, Captain Bill. But I think Scientology, I think that, do you know what Captain Bill was before Scientology?
He was a motorcycle cop in Mississippi.
Yes, he was a police
during
officer.
the civil rights movement.
Right. So he was a police officer in Mississippi, but his fixation on OT3. It's good because this show was designed to get into implants. And Captain Bill was completely stuck. Something went really wrong with him. Now, he was a very early OT3 person because he was on the ship.
And he was tasked with delivering OT3. He and David Mayo were sent to Edinburgh to the Hubbard Academy for Personal Integrity, HAPPY.
Yeah.
And I interviewed both of them about their experiences there and various other people.
Well, a lot of people heard about the poor guy in Edinburgh who hurled himself off a balcony to kill himself.
James Stuaryt.
What was Captain Bill's involvement in that?
Well, I believe Bill was running the organization, and I got very interested in that story. I read the contemporary newspaper accounts where Scientology said, "Oh, he was a newbie. He had done very little Scientology." You're going, he was doing OT3. He was the head of the Durban organization. What do you mean? And I read Robert Kaufman's Inside Scientology, the first man to write a book called Inside Scientology. Very interesting book too, or How I Became a Superman, the subtitle. He took the OT3 course in Edinburgh and the OT4 course indeed, and then went into Psychiatric Institute to try and undo what had happened to him. And he gives an account of what happened to James Stuaryt. James Stuaryt was an epileptic, and he was ordered to not have any more fits. And he was ordered not to take any more medicine. This, of course, happened to Tori Chrisman some years later, the wonderful Magoo, that she was ordered not to take her meds. And you can't do that with epilepsy. It's a serious condition. So he had a fit, and he'd been told he mustn't have any more fits. And there's a story of him crawling around on his hands and knees in the waiting room, picking the lint out of the carpet, with his head bandaged because he banged his head during the fit. And Captain Bill told me that he'd had him there in I think it was a 3-story building, Bill said, and they had these very steeply pitched roofs, slate roofs. And one evening when it was raining, he had Stuart crawl across this roof and back, which would be pretty scary for anybody, frankly. But this, of course, is at the time of overboarding, being thrown off the Apollo in Corfu. And punishment had become a normal part of the Scientology approach. You know, where Dianetics had been meant to relieve trauma, Scientology was now going to give you trauma, you know, the slightly different approach to the problem. So Stuart basically, you know, found himself with nowhere to go. He dedicated his whole life to Scientology, and he killed himself. His wife came to the room and found, you know, this had happened, called Scientology straight away, and Scientologists arrived before the police to clean away any OT materials from the room. Yeah, just an awful situation. And let me say something here. That in 1993, I was working with Lawrence Wollersheim and Bob Penny. I was nominally the president of FactNet, the Fight Against Coercive Tactics Network, which was really Bob Penny's work. You know, just the most incredible man, an unsung hero. Lawrence said, how many suicides are there in Scientology? And so I went off and did a little project. And working on the real number of Scientologists, which isn't 11 million, unless you count the body thetans, it was more like 40,000. And looking at those numbers and the number of suicides I was able to trace per year, I worked out that Scientology had a suicide rate about 10 times of the normal rate in the UK or the US. And James Stuaryt was one of those poor people who, you know, had reached the top of the bridge at that time and found himself unable to cope, unable to manage with what had happened to him. Among the people I researched, there were a number who were actually right at the top, working close to Hubbard, and then they found that all the promises that had been made to them were false. For For example, John Neugebauer, commonly known as Neuger, who was Helen O'Brien's partner. Helen O'Brien was the head of the Hubbard Association of Scientologists in 1952-53 during the Philadelphia rabbit ears doctorate course, where you could become a doctor and have a doctorate in 6 weeks of listening to Ron Hubbard, which is the fastest way to get a doctorate anywhere in the universe, other than buying one from Sequoia University, which is what Ron Hubbard himself did, and that just took a few moments. They actually bought Sequoia University, awarded him a doctorate, and then faked a telegram to make it look as if he'd been given it before Scientology bought this fake university. Another story. John Neugebauer had served in the Pacific, and his job was bulldozing the corpses of fallen soldiers into trenches. And he had terrible nightmares, and he just couldn't, his post-traumatic stress disorder was just overwhelming. And Hubbard promised him the Scientology would cure this. And a year or so later, John Neugebauer killed himself because the promise was false, as all of Hubbard's promises proved to be. You can't cure cancer, leukemia, raise people from the dead using Scientology. Despite, in fact, one of the stories that Helen O'Brien told was about him having a goldfish bowl on the counter in Philadelphia so that people could throw their eyeglasses in there that they no longer needed. And she said in all the time they were there, nobody put their eyeglasses into this. Nobody was healed in the way that Hubbard had been claiming. But I digress. This takes us back to Edinburgh and to Captain Bill, the founder of the Ronsorg. And I was there when the Ronsorg began, really. Bill had been publishing these sector operations bulletins, which he claimed to have been receiving from the mothership, where L. Ron L. Ray, as he called Ron Hubbard, had now gone. We now know that L. Ron L. Ray was actually in Corona. No, he was in Creston, near San Luis Obispo, and he was very definitely not on the mothership. He was rambling around in a demented haze in 1982 and 83. Yes. Gradually coming apart, according to people who were there with him. But nonetheless, Captain Bill was telepathically receiving the sector operations bulletins and writing them out in handwriting that is astonishingly like L. Ron Hubbard's, a process called cloning by some commentators upon authoritarian cults. And I met him in October 1983 when I hosted a meeting at the Crown Hotel in East Grinstead, and we had about 60 people. It was the first public meeting of ex-Scientologists or disaffected Scientologists in the UK. And I held it because 3 days before somebody had knocked on my door and begged me to host the meeting because he was scared of hosting it, and so I accepted because I'm not very clever and walked myself right into trouble. But Bill, you can still find, I think, somewhere on the internet, the recordings that I had made that night of Captain Bill shouting at us, and David Gaiman coming along who'd been the head of public relations in Scientology, who'd just been punished by being sent out to Gilman Hot Springs to dig ditches. And he'd come back and was begging us to go another mile with the church and telling us to remember Ampranistics. And none of us had ever heard of Ampranistics, which was a mid-60s breakaway group from Scientology. And Bill, I will never forget Bill storming onto the stage after David Gaiman had sort of been there for 15 minutes saying, I've got to go any minute now, I've got to go soon. And on he went. And Bill came onto the stage and he went, I have been with Ron for more than many centuries. And yeah, we got all the stuff about the Markabians and how he was going to create a new civilization. It is worth noting that Bill died because he had a tumor in his throat.
Wouldn't get cancer treatment.
Yeah, and he wouldn't actually, I was told he wouldn't even have a tracheotomy to allow him to breathe. So he strangled because he was sure that his powers could overcome this. He didn't reach the age of 60, I don't think. And he was, as we both found, he was a charming conversationalist and
he was very affable. He wasn't a pug like Miscavige.
No.
But boy, did he have a few screws loose. If you said to Bill, I think I said this one day, I don't want to eat. The CO tend to give you chicken for dinner 5 to 6 days a week. Chicken, every night. That's total CO diet. For years when I've been gone a while, so I didn't want to eat the chicken, and I had just having some casual conversation with Captain Bill. Apollo crew usually have that little bond so that you knew each other.
You've been in the foxholes together, yeah.
So I was just shooting the breeze, and I think I said, I don't want to eat the chicken, I'll go get him. In those days, I wasn't even vegan. I've been vegan now for 30 years, but I used to eat meat, and I said, I'll go get a McDonald's burger or something. And immediately Captain Bill said, 75 million years ago, they had that exact burger with the bun and the cheese. This is not something new in this civilization. 75 million years ago, you could order the same burger. And I noted in my head, trained in looking at things through the technology. This guy has been so screwed up on OT3 that no matter what simple, stupid little casual statement, Bill cannot unplug himself from 75 million. He's sort of gone to 75 million, stuck himself in that era or something. Any comment?
Yeah.
Did he bring up 75 million or the OT3 incident when you talked to him?
Well, we talked around the edge of it. I have a very simple view of Scientology. If you look at what Hubbard claims he's undoing, that's what he's doing. The opposite of what it says. So what Scientology fundamentally claims to be is a way of undoing implants, hypnotic incidents, whatever we want to call them, engrams, whatever we want to call them. Whereas in reality, it's a way of giving you implants. And so Scientologists, and often for decades, even decades after leaving, people are still fixed on certain ideas. The first implant is the only one. And Hubbard talks about the only one. You're one of the people who knows about this. And the idea is that somebody comes to believe that they're the only one that understands. I've met this so many times in ex-Scientologists that they understand, this person knows what Ron really meant. And Captain Bill had a really huge case of this. He did say to me one day, he said that he had twice witnessed Hubbard doing things that if any Scientologist other than him had seen them, they would leave immediately. And I, for weeks, tried to get him to tell me what these things were that he'd seen, but he was, no. But he'd seen Hubbard do horrifically bad things on 2 occasions. And yet he was still fixated on this idea. And the problem is that the implants, the things that you sent over to me, like the gorilla goals and the bear goals, the train implants, they are so incredibly childish. They are like a 10-year-old. They're not kind of grown-up science fiction even. They're just this, which is the impression, when I went through History of Man with Mike Rinder, which was great, good fun. And I read the damn book. And I haven't read a Scientology book for a very long time, almost 40 years. And because I was doing something with Mike, I thought, I'll read this book. And it was grueling. It's just rubbish. It makes no sense. It doesn't hold together. And one of the things, these huge periods of time, that we're in a universe which is held through dating the background microwave radiation, which is coming from all directions. You can date the universe, and it's about just short of 13.8 billion years, 1,000 million years. Hubbard goes off happily into trillions, so he's multiplied it by 1,000. you know. And then he goes off into quadrillions when you get into the OT5 materials. And he seems to have this idea that these huge periods of time, like looking at these supposed implants, that this happened 100 trillion or 350 trillion years ago. And you're going, that's an awfully long time to be doing something, you know. I mean, given the span of a human life, that's a very long time indeed to be doing something so incredibly boring as, you know, being, you know, held in an airplane door, or, you know, put on a railway station. It's a mockery. It's also a complete, and I'm going on here, I accept this.
Well,
it's a complete evaluation, isn't it? You're being told what happened to you, and you never
totally evaluation. Here's the thing. First of all, the definition of implant isn't a dental bridge put in your jaw, or you know, the general public may not understand. You know, people have their boobs implanted to look more curvaceous. They put in a kind of silicone balloon into your breast. That's not the definition of implant. In Scientology, an implant is mental. It's in the mind.
In the consciousness.
And in Scientology, inevitably, the evil psychiatrists,
yes,
centuries, millions, trillions of years, wanted to lessen the effectiveness and power of spiritual beings. So their agenda was to, this is Scientology belief, not mine,
no,
not me trying to tell you. This is, I was trained in all of this to the highest level possible. 8 of us reached that. So I'm telling it to you from my training. Psychiatrists put in embedded thoughts into the mind, destructive thoughts, very, very bad thoughts, and dichotomy thoughts. So you'd end up a bipolar character, because you could be implanted to love and you'd be implanted to hate. You'd be implanted to create, and then you'd be implanted to destroy. And if you get conflicting embedded thoughts, you can become someone who can't even make up their mind left or right, north or south. So anyway, Scientology believed, but they seem to be somewhat embarrassed with their fervent implant belief. I'll tell you why. You don't get into these secret levels willy-nilly. You can't just finish your lower grades and get onto OT2. Oh no, a complete check is done on OT eligibility to get these secret stuff, the OT3 implant. You have to get OSA clearance, Office of Special Affairs. Look up all your files and knowledge reports which have been cross-indexed to see if you're a risk. Why are they embarrassed? Because you might go on the internet and say, I just read the most ridiculous things of spirits boxed into glycol and hurled on top of volcanoes and landed and leached themselves parasitically on human bodies, and you must pay the cult endlessly year after year to release these attached spirits. People go on the web and do it as I speak, but they don't want that. So you have to get eligibility to learn about these secret psychiatric implants.
And obviously, if that worked, they'd never have let me do the OT levels. No. Look at what happened.
Well, they're much tighter. They're much, much tighter than in your day, Jon. Much tighter. So not only do they scan your life history to see if you leak their secrets, but they then give you an interrogatory, a police polygraph interrogatory.
Security check.
Yeah. Questioning you upside down and sideways and especially on your mental stability, because people have gone what Scientology calls type 3. Type 3 is having a mental breakdown.
Well, let me
have had mental breakdowns.
Let me add something to that. The closest psychiatric institute to St Hill in East Grinstead is Haywards Heath. And I received a request to go and talk to them there. They had a German guy there who'd done OT3. He was very violent. He'd ripped his clothes off and was smearing the walls with his excrement. That was what OT3 had done for him. And I was quite surprised because, of course, obviously in Scientology, there'd been the attempt to condition me to believe that all psychiatrists are evil. And I knew that wasn't true because I'd met a couple who were quite decent people. I had met some that I really didn't like, and I did campaign against certain psychiatric treatments. And I still believe that the use of electroconvulsive therapy was excessive, massively excessive. So I haven't changed my view or become a Markabian or anything. But they asked me to go and talk, and I thought, well, it's a psychiatric institute. They work really hard. Who's going to be really that interested? 14 staff. These are people working 50, 60 hour weeks normally. And it's not an easy job to do, looking after people who are, ripping their clothes off, punching you if you come in the room and smearing their excrement over the walls. But these people had seen so many people coming out, particularly OT3, that they'd just be offloaded into this hospital. And they really cared. They really wanted to understand how to help these people. And they stayed through the whole talk as well, all of them. So it was a surprise, that they cared that much and that they wanted to be able to help, and that they saw this particular problem. So they were telling me, yeah, we see people regularly who have become psychotic or triggered an acute psychosis because of Scientology, and very particularly because of OT3. David Mayo, the last time I talked to David in 2013, we had a very long conversation, more than 2 hours. And in that conversation, he said that in 1968, when he opened the OT3 pack, he realized that Ron Hubbard was mad. And thereafter, his attempt was to steer people away from Scientology. So there was a bird dog in the control room, as Ron Hubbard would later say, that David had twigged that there was something terribly wrong going on.
Even though you mentioned these, and I'm sure there are definitely cases that had that outcome, Scientology tries to spook the general audience, popular culture, by saying, don't read it, you'll get pneumonia and die.
Well, you'll die within 2 days.
Let me tell you, John, let me tell you.
You might die laughing.
People have OT3 materials are available infinitely on the internet.
Well,
I haven't heard of anyone getting pneumonia and dying.
Yeah, Robert Kaufman published a story in 1973. It's been available ever since. It's even been in South Park, So, but there is a little bit of an irony here, which is that Hubbard was desperately trying to sell a script called Revolt in the Stars, which describes the OT3 incident. Yeah. In 1968, from 1968 onwards, the book covers were changed to include pictures which were said to come from the OT3 incident. So here was this anomaly that if you're exposed to this material, you'll die within 2 days of pneumonia. And Hubbard was exposing people to it. He wanted to make a movie about it, which, because John Travolta has been trying to fund all of these years. And of course, the script is available, and it's cheap hokum. It's, there's nothing particularly interesting about it. At least, stories like Fear, some of his older stories, are really quite clever. But by the time he gets to Revolt in the Stars and Battlefield Earth and Mission Earth, I think his talent has pretty much deserted him.
We use the word OT3 and people may not understand the definition of that. Scientology is composed of levels. You keep doing the doctrines of a certain level, then you get to the next level. So the lower levels are just called grades. Grade 1, 2, 3. The OT levels are called OT1, OT2, OT3. OT3 up to OT. OT3 is known as the wall of fire. Apparently, this is where you transition from being a dopey humanoid into really getting the secrets of the universe. And what the secrets of the universe is, Hubbard describes a catastrophic incident that happened 75 million years ago, where an evil emperor called Zeno rounded up billions of people. And to summarize all this, they were captured, they were boxed. How do you box a spirit? And shipped to Earth and placed.
There's a picture of this on the old copy of Dianetics and Evolution, the Evolution of a Science, of them putting the boxes onto a spaceship, just in case that might restimulate somebody's memory of this thing and cause them to have pneumonia.
So these spirits were put on top of volcanoes, which just exploded.
Well, and hydrogen bombs were dropped into the volcano for some reason.
Hydrogen bombs.
Electric ribbons were used to collect the poor little
powerful winds where spirits got stuck to the ribbon and so on. And then after they were zapped, they were made to watch a movie like a Cecil B. DeMille panoramic Technicolor Vista movie.
For 36 days.
Lasted 36 days. And
that's some movie, eh?
You see in modern England, the trains, the countryside.
Everything was 1965 in these implants.
Yeah.
Nothing went beyond 1965.
Right. And by paying Scientology a lot of money, you undo your attached spirits from this $75 million implant. And loosely, its nomenclature is OT3. That's what it's called, OT3. It's about $35,000, but they now charge you monthly. You go home, you have the original indoctrination, then you go home and you hold these soup cans and you talk to these body thetans. And you send them, you ask them which volcano, and you send them back in time, 75 million years. It's a ritual. It's a ritual. You're very trained in how to do this. And people do this for years, for years.
I met a guy who'd done it for 13 years. And luckily, in the independent Scientologists, this wonderful guy, Steve Bisbee, who was a friend of mine. And he sat down with this guy and he said, "You finish now, you can go home. You don't need to do the rest of the OT levels. You've got rid of all of the body thetans. Thank you very much." Because Steve wasn't interested in collecting money. There are a couple of interesting things about this. When Hubbard worked on this material in Gran Canaria in the winter of 1966, he got himself into quite a state. Now, he said that these volcanoes are in two places. One was in the Canary Islands, which is where he was, and the other was in Hawaii, 75 million years ago. Well, there's a very interesting paper written by my friend Peter Ford, which is somewhere on the internet, where he examined the scientific evidence. He has some interest in geology and this kind of thing. He pointed out that the Canary Islands and Hawaii are actually quite recent. They're not 75 million years old. Now, Scientology, you have to have the right date and the right location. So the location is wrong. Now let's turn to the date. Hubbard, I believe, was looking at newspaper reports of the Great Extinction, which happened somewhere over, the date has been moved closer. It happened somewhere near, I think, 60 or 65 million years ago. So the date and the location are wrong. And of course, Hubbard got him, I interviewed Virginia Downsborough twice, and she rescued Hubbard from, he telegrammed and asked her desperately to come out and help him. And she told me, and she was still training people in OT3 when I met her. So she still believed in this stuff herself. But nonetheless, she told me Hubbard was no longer eating, that he was in a frantic crazy state. He was saying that the body thetans, the little beings, had taken him over. And she said that he was living on a shelf full of drugs, and she held her hands out to show how many pill bottles there were. I desperately tried to get out of her what was on that shelf because I'm interested in that. I've got some idea there would have been barbiturates, amphetamines, and Demerol, which is an opioid that he used. But that's only 3 bottles. And the last time I talked with David Mayo, he said that Virginia had told him what they were. And I was never able, I kept writing to him, I was never able to get out of him what these drugs were. I don't suppose it matters. I suppose what's really important is that he was using drugs. Now, there is something very strange in this. I first met Jerry Armstrong in, must have been the end of June, just after the first Armstrong case in 1984. And he'd come to testify in the what came to be known as the Leahy case, a child custody case here. And Jerry told me that Hubbard had taken phenobarbital, the barbiturate, which is later confirmed. There's a lecture. I wrote a paper called Never Believe a Hypnotist, which is now a Hubbard quote, which is, it's on this channel where I read it out, or you can go and read it where somebody's put it up. But there you have a Hubbard lecture where he says that he became addicted to phenobarbital. And he made himself a guinea pig on an experiment to become addicted to phenobarbital. His Navy records, his Veterans Administration records show that he was given barbiturate, phenobarbital. And so it just so happened that week, I had a friend of mine who had done OT2 had asked me, should he buy a new motorcycle or should he do OT3? Now, I was somewhat disillusioned by this point, so I suggested that he read the OT3 pack and then buy the Ducati motorbike, And he came back. I arrived back from meeting Jerry for the first time, being told about phenobarbital. And this friend said, you can have the OT3 pack. I don't want to do this. I'm going to buy the Ducati, which he did. And I said to him, Jerry's just told me that Hubbard was taking drugs when he wrote this. And this guy looked at me and he said, phenobarbital. And I stopped and I said, I didn't say that. I said drugs. What makes you say phenobarbital? And he said, when I was 15, I left school and joined the Navy. And I traveled all around the world and I took just about every drug there is. If you take too much phenobarbital, you get the idea of exploding and that you're divided into multiple beings. So there is the origin of the technology. And this is what happened to Hubbard, that he became lost in this material and he believed it and he persuaded us that it was true.
Oh, he absolutely believed it. And after OT3, OT4 is hilarious. Oh, you ordered drug rundowns on these BTs. BT is a being. And now you're going to do what you had to run out your drugs. You do drug rundown procedures on these invisible attached spirits.
And they don't pay for it. You have to pay for it.
Oh,
as Tony Ortega has pointed out.
The cost of all of this is monumental. It's at least $250,000 to get up to OT8. But listen to this. This is the most important thing now. Listen to this. When you've achieved OT8, I've already said this on another show, but it's so important, it's worth a revisit. When you've reached OT8 and you act a little wacko, or more than wacko, you're acting, you steal and embezzle money from your partners, you beat up your wife and hit the children when you get home at night, you're acting like what Scientology would say, you're not living up to OT8 status. So guess what the cult do? You've misbehaved, you're doing horrible things that are making the internet, people are reporting on you. You are now called a bypassed case.
Yeah.
The definition of bypassed case means you didn't really do the procedures.
Mm.
You were in it for status. You wanted to write your success story. You wanted the CS to approve you achieved OT3, OT4, OT5, OT. They're all handling your extraterrestrial aliens that leached onto you after the hydrogen bombs. That's all it is. From OT3 to OT8, you're handling your BTs, your body thetans, the extraterrestrial spirits that have glommed onto you, and only Scientology procedures can free you of these spirits at great cost. Now, bypass case means he didn't really do it. Therefore, the order is you go back to the bottom of the bridge and redo every level at your expense. It's very cunning. It's very crafty. They manage your spirituality. Those CSs saw you did every single step and got the EPN, you got the result and outcome of each step.
And everything was
Their CSs approved it, but now they claim bypass case. And when an OT3 or an OT7 or does something, is doing pedophilia with his little niece, and CO members think, how can this be? Immediately they go, bypass case, bypass case. Nothing wrong with the technology. He fraudulently went up to OT. So he didn't really do it, because if he really did it, he would be OT.
Yeah, and by now we'd have seen one of these OTs. I mean, I've been around Scientology since I was 19 years old, and I'm 66 now, and I've yet to see a single operating thetan act. And
but look at how cunning that is to get off the hook on their technology.
Yeah,
their technology was perfect.
Technology works, so there's something wrong with you.
Yeah, you attested to levels you didn't really do. So just now,
just like everyone else.
Do it all. Huh?
Just like everyone else. The idea that any of these conditions exist, when you go right down to the bottom of the bridge, you have the communication release, right at the grade 0. And the end phenomenon of this is that you are able to communicate freely with anyone on any subject. I have yet to meet a Scientologist that can communicate freely with anyone on any subject, because of course Scientology prohibits this. You can't communicate with people like you and me, because we're considered to be persona non grata, suppressive persons. You can't talk about the technology of Scientology and what it means, because that's verbal technology. So already there's a rule built in that says you are going to attest that you've achieved this ability. However, you're not going to be allowed to do this. And if you try, for example, to talk to a Scientologist about, well, neurology, that's a good subject to bring up with Scientologists, about the brain and what we know about the brain. They cannot talk about it. It's a taboo. So in fact, the communication has been inhibited. And step by step, everybody in Scientology, and I am making a broad generalization here, everybody in Scientology lies when they attest a level, because they haven't found the source of all problems and can make them disappear at grade 1. They haven't overcome all of the overts and withholds, all of the dreadful things they've done at level 2. It just keeps on going. And so, and it happens in every authoritarian group. Our methods work. If you'd prayed properly, then you would have got a Maserati. You didn't pray properly. And so the blame is always passed down to the believer, so that they feel shamed and inadequate, because they do not have superpowers. But OT3 is a particular case in point. I had a very good friend when I came into Scientology, this wonderful woman who I will not name, but she was clear, and she was ebullient. She was really quite wonderful. I didn't see her for 4 years, and I was by this time doing OT3 myself. and she was a completely changed person. And I didn't understand what had happened. She was dismal, unhappy, and she couldn't tell me why. And then she left Scientology after I'd left Scientology, and she explained that she couldn't find any body thetans when she took OT3. And she'd gone from being this wonderful, cheerful, ebullient person to being locked into this terrible sense of guilt that she didn't perceive these invisible things that other people like me were willing to make up. And another case was, which I probably can talk about openly, Stephanie Ryburn, who was the head of the Birmingham mission when I first got involved. And she was away, and a few months later she came back, and she always seemed to view me with disdain and contempt. And I thought it was because I had long hair, something like that, and that wasn't acceptable. But she always frowned when she looked at me, and she never called me by my name. 7 years later, we're both taking OT5 together. New era Dianetics for operating thetans. And she comes out of the waiting room grinning at me, and she says, John, I'm sure it's the first time she called me by name. And isn't it wonderful that Ron's come up with something that deals with the mess that OT3 makes? And she was somebody who had trained on the Class 8 auditing course with Hubbard on the ship. So she'd had it from the horse's mouth. And here she is, 15 years later, basically saying that her life, 15 years, has been awful. And she now believes that this new process will alleviate the harm that OT3 did. It probably didn't. I imagine that within a few days, reality struck and she was unhappy again. That's the way of it, isn't it? That you go into session, you have that euphoria, that the very good indicators, the euphoria that is typical of an altered state, of a trance state. You feel great. And then 3 days later, you don't. And that's your fault. That's because you're a roller coaster. That's because you've associated with somebody who's suppressive. And then we look at Hubbard's own moods, his terrible rages, his despair and depression, him asking Sarge Fouth to kill him at the end of his life because he had failed completely. And you're going, roller coaster? It's the fundamental characteristic of Ron Hubbard. He was bipolar. He got very high and then he got very low. And, I've interviewed so many people who knew him going right back to his childhood. And it was, they all report this one after another, that he was a man who suffered a great deal of morose depression. And of course, in 1947, wrote a letter to the Veterans Administration begging for psychiatric treatment to deal with this condition. Not long afterwards, he'd be claiming to have developed a therapy that cured everything. It's not true.
Back to the word implant.
Back to the word implant. I actually, while we were talking, I looked the word implant up. You see, I always keep my technical dictionary right by me.
Oh, by the way, if you go online now to buy that site has been taken down. They no longer publish that, and you can't buy that book anymore.
Oh, that is so sad.
What you have is a collectible.
Oh, excellent. This is a particular collectible because this is Jon Atack's copy from 1975. Whoa, there aren't many of those around. It says here, an implant, a painful and forceful means of overwhelming a being with artificial purpose or false concepts in a malicious attempt to control and suppress him. That sounds like Scientology to me. An electronic means of overwhelming the thetan with a significance, or an unwilling and unknowing receipt of a thought, an intentional installation of fixed ideas contra survival to the thetan. So now we know.
Some of these implants became more and more bizarre and weird. Hubbard wrote up, and if you I invite the audience to go to Wikipedia or go to Google and put in Scientology implants Wikipedia, and you'll get all these. Now, let me give you an example of a really bizarre this is worthy of Captain Bill. There's a so-called implant in a series of implants called heliotrope implants. And what it is you, according to Scientology doctrine, were sucked into a very big fat dog, like a Newfoundland dog. And you were sucked in and you went through his esophagus, through his intestines, and you were spat out by his rectum. That's why it's called obscene dog. And while you traveled through the
digestive system,
inside of the dog, you were zapped with implanted thoughts. But how bizarre is that? You were swallowed by a dog and spat out by his anus. These are wild, and supposedly this happened to you several billion years ago. But you see, Scientology wants your money. Above else, they want your money. And they claim their techniques, their secret techniques, will alleviate you and give you back your mental presence of sanity. Well, as John keeps saying, sometimes the reverse happens. The Lisa McPherson case is just a total example of Scientology doctrine, morning, noon, and night, till she went crazy, absolutely crazy. I believe the death of Lisa McPherson is on, the blood is on the hands of Scientology. And
very specifically of David Miscavige.
Yes, of David Miscavige, absolutely. Well, you know, we've got enough, this has been fun. We've got enough material for a part 2 on implants. I would really like to get into the content of OT8 with you. And I would like to get into, I think we once said we were going to do that.
The last thing we did, we said, I think
right.
You said
I don't want OT8 to be an add-on. We've had a little chunk. You know what we've done? We've set the groundwork on implants for you. This is Scientology 101 on implants, right?
We've run out
We've now laid the foundation. Now that we've laid the foundation, I want probably, let's do OT8 in the very next video, John. But I think we've given you enough data points. John covered some really important things from summarizing years of research. So we're going to let you settle with that. Come on back to us and get the secrets of OT8 in the very next video, or the next, depending on the culture of if there's a nuclear bomb, we won't. We'll be talking more on Russia. It's lovely being with you. I think 1 hour has easily gone already. Let's do some really good educational stuff. Thank you, John, for inviting me. Let's organize our next visit.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you for educating our audience with very important data points. Sorry that this is a grim subject. I do hope that you can bring some laughter with you on it all. Oh, by the way, Scientology, in embarrassment of all of this, have pulled out of the brief. These were lectures Hubbard was giving. Hubbard kept giving these lectures called the St. Hill Special Briefing Course. All these implant videos have been taken out. They're not deleted, they have them in archives, but they don't, I think they're embarrassed at how wild.
And they lost all of those tech films that Hubbard made that he spent so long making, particularly the one where David Mayo explains that if this video is lost, children, you'll know what happened. And it was lost. I must be one of the only people who actually saw that. Just to come back to one thing, actually, before we close, that when Captain Bill was recalled for his craziness, something did actually happen. He was made second deputy commodore. So in fact, Hubbard was the commodore of Scientology, not the admiral, sadly, not the fleet commander.
Self-titled.
So yeah, I'm afraid that unless he was appointed by his own body thetans, which is also possible. His wife was the deputy commodore, Mary Sue Hubbard, who went to prison, of course, and was then, completely excommunicated. And Captain Bill was made second deputy commodore. And I have an interesting thing here, which is that when Hubbard was gone, the commodore was gone, the deputy commodore was gone, that was Mary Sue. So in fact, when Captain Bill left Scientology, he was the head of Scientology, de facto. Now, he appointed me as chairman of the OT Committee UK, and I believe that was the most senior position that anybody was appointed to by Captain Bill. So technically, all of the bank accounts of Scientology should belong to me. That's what I...
Oh boy, there are some truly colorful characters in Scientology, but Captain Bill really takes the cake. And,
absolutely.
And Tony Ortega did a blog called The Ballad of Captain Bill, where there's a video of Captain Bill singing how
we all live only to die in our ship in the sky. Yeah.
Can as a we got to lighten this up. Implants are so it all sounds evil, and I'd like. Would it be possible for Spike to add it as a finale, Captain Bill's ballad at the end of this video? So you.
We shall have to see, won't we?
Okay. Love you, Jon.
Yeah, I love you too. Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
We all live only to die in a ship out in the sky. Warriors for a cause more than life. Duty, honor, one and strife. We all live only to die in our ships out in the sky. We are loyal, brave, and true. There is nothing we dare not do. We all die only to live. Freedom, justice is ours to give. Stars and laurels for the bold. We combat galactic patrol. Soar through the stars we go. Through the space we know for you.
Hi, Jon here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.